Um, Great. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about the Azazel Shimmy and this group of people who were making theater together for 3 years only in Warsaw between the wars. But these 3 years have sort of captured my attention and imagination, and so we're going to do a deep dive into the years of 1926 to 1929. First, I'm going to give some history and context about the troupe and the theater, and then I'm going to talk about a specific project that restaged this number called the Shimmy, and we're going to think together. Well, I'm going to talk and you're going to think, but I will also be thinking about the way that practice can be research and the way of restaging performance as a methodology of performance research, especially when these genres were performed and were ephemeral in these ways. Okay. So, Azazel. They were active in Warsaw again between 1926 and 1929. These dates are debatable. The archive is an unreliable narrator when it comes to this troupe, especially because many of them were moving around and joining different troupes at different times and sort of calling themselves under whatever umbrella of a name seemed to be most useful to them at the time. But they were really invested in creating a form of an elevated aesthetic, a form of literary cabaret that was satirical and was sharp and was biting. They would perform folk songs and original songs and sketches and literary satire all in one evening. So instead of coming to the theater and seeing one large production of something, you would go to a much smaller space. And it's a variety show of sorts with this group of people. This is their logo here with the goat. And something that's really interesting is that the way that they employed artists across different mediums is that visual artists and musicians and theater performers would all be a part of the troupe. So it's not like they were hiring people to create a set design, but that they were creating something together. And that's something that's really interesting to me about how they're performing, is this relationship that they have to each other and the way that maybe they are or maybe they are not functioning as a unit. I'm especially interested in two things in this presentation that I'm going to go into. One is the visual language of the staging and of the performance. And two is the relationship, like I was saying, between the artists and the mediums that facilitated this kind of performance. And a secret third one is the Azazel Shimmy, which is one specific number that we have been on the hunt for a long time. Oh no. That's annoying. Okay, so who are we talking about? Here are our archival friends, people who were at different times involved with this theater. I'll go through them pretty quickly. Mosse was a writer, huge person in the Yiddish avant-garde, and wrote much of the material for both the sketches and the lyrics for many of the songs that the troupe would perform. Henich Kahn was his writing partner and would then compose the music to what Brotherzon was writing. Tear Czeszewska, who went on to also have a theater career, Ola Lilith and Vlad Godik, who were married to each other for a while. Henrik Berlevi, who is best known as a modernist printmaker and graphic designer and visual artist, and pulled a lot from constructivism and studied with El Lissitzky, also participated in this theater. And then David Herman of Dybbuk fame was also one of the early directors for this troupe. And so already we're seeing that there are key figures who, after participating with Azazel, went on to have careers that maybe were very informed by their early days, or maybe were very informed by their relationships to each other and by this mode of performance in a variety show, pulling from different mediums at the same time. And so I'm interested in if studying this specific node of the Yiddish avant-garde can tell us about things that they did later on, or could tell us about their relationships to each other. Here's the visual world of Azazel. So this is an albatross cover by Berlevy in 1923, and then a print that he did from the Dybbuk. And then this is a photograph it's at the YIVO archive, of what is probably Sambation or Azazel in Warsaw in 1929. And what's interesting to study all three of these different visual materials are the ways that there are some resonances between the visual material that Berlevy created for promotional material or for these literary journals, and the visual material that is really present both in the set design but also in the physicality of the performers. And so I'm really interested in the way that these different mediums were communicating to each other. Some of the things you can notice between the three of them are lots of strong, scant lines, interplay between light and dark, which is really classic expressionist. And so we're also looking at material that is tying in other modernist art movements and manifestos at this time. And so there's a big salad that's happening here of influences, and being able to look at different visual mediums helps us understand what some of the ingredients of the salad might have been. Okay, the shimmy. So the shimmy was a number that was performed at the theater, and my understanding of it was sort of like the theme song of the theater troupe. There is one recording of it on Sirena Records. The A side is the Azazel Shimmy and the B side is the Kaddish Shimmy, which is fascinating. I don't know what a Kaddish Shimmy is, but I'm dying to know. Unfortunately, it seems like I have yet to find an actual copy of this recording. So if anyone has one or has found it, please let me know. Otherwise, there also seems to be no charts for the music. And until recently, the lyrics were also a little bit seemed to be lost. However, in a collection at YIVO entitled Folk Songs Undated is this piece of paper that seems to have some version of the lyrics of the Azazel Shimmy. However, the lyrics on this page are different or are not the exact same as the ones that are listed in Berg Kutscher's memoir, Once There Was Warsaw. However, again, the refrain is listed in the memoir, but there is no refrain or repeating phrase in the lyrics on this sheet of paper. So possibly people thought maybe, everyone knows the chorus, we don't have to write it down. Maybe there are different versions. Who knows? But we have different, seemingly a little bit unreliable archives of what this song might have been, and we don't have the music that went with it. But it seems to be a very interesting performance mode, especially when we think about shimmy as a dance form that had some connection to the United States and some connection to Black America. And we're thinking about how these musical forms travel across continents and across oceans. There's a lot of really interesting history to dig in there just by looking at the shimmy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the relationship to this archive. I'm pulling here from Saidiya Hartman, who writes about speculative archives. And I'm going to read the quote in full because I think it's really interesting. It is possible to exceed or negotiate the constitutive limits of the archive by advancing a series of speculative arguments and exploiting the capacities of the subjunctive, a grammatical mood that expresses doubts, wishes, and possibilities, in fashioning a narrative which is based upon archival research, and by that I mean a critical reading of the archive that mimes the figurative dimensions of history. I intend both to tell an impossible story and to amplify the impossibility of its telling. Hartman here in Venus in Two Acts is writing about the impossibility of telling stories of enslavement, and I am not drawing a parallel to these different kinds of gaps in the archives, but I think the idea of speculative archival research is useful when we're thinking about ephemeral forms like performance. And I'm putting this in conversation with Rebecca Schneider's ideas about reenactment and what we learn from actually enacting things versus just reading them. So we restaged it. How did that happen? So similar to the ways that there were these interests in the visual and in the performance elements, the restaging also had a very vested interest in the visual. And so Daniel Turetsky created these visuals based on archival research that I had done. If you can see in the little animation, the person who's going in and out is a direct take from that photograph that we looked at earlier. And the background and the way that the lines are working is a contemporary adaptation of a lot of the aesthetics that we were seeing. This was mainly created into this 3D moving stage piece that we can see being used in these different images that throughout the performance would go through the audience, immersing them more so in the world of Azazel. On stage there you have Luca Evans, and one of the goats is Weaver, and another goat off camera is Ozzy. And so we had performers who were taking on different elements of Azazel and putting it all together to create a shared experience. So that's one aspect. The next aspect is really thinking about the characters and the networks that I was talking about earlier. 4 different people took on the characters of Brotherzon, Kon, and then Ola Lilith and Vlad Godik, and brought them to life through an actual act of embodiment, using very minimal biographical data, but through a framing device of this like meta-theatrical presentation about Azazel that then went into a more immersive performance. And so there's a question there about whether or not meta-theatrical performance helps us understand the like slippery temporality of archival research and unreliable archives, and what are the ways that we can enact that and perform that. So that was another key component. Then finally, the lyrics and the music. So Ira Hunan Temple and I worked closely together to translate first the page that we had found, or I had found from the archive, as a form of connecting to the lyrics, not necessarily to perform it in English, but to get into the lyrics themselves. Ira then created a new setting of music that was based on shimmy as a genre, knowing that we don't know what that Azazel shimmy actually sounded like, and knowing that we're working with unreliable materials. But something that this enabled us to do was engage with the written text as if it was a performance text. And the way that we translated it and the way that we worked with it had to take into consideration the fact that it was going to be performed, which is a different way of understanding the text than just text on the page. And I believe gave us a deeper understanding of what we were working with. I'm going to play a tiny clip of the performance so you can hear what it sounded like. Can you hear that? Okay, great. And so you can see some shimmying happening on the... and there was a performance element too with a performed dance. And so where does this dance come from? If we don't know what the shimmy actually sounded like, and we don't know exactly how it was going to be danced in 1920s Warsaw, what are we pulling from? And in order to choreograph a number to this song that we were creating a new setting of, I wanted to understand the relationship between the musicological history of the shimmy, and it led me to also looking into other genres that traveled across oceans like tango, and to understand the roots of where this dance came from, which in fact, as most dances are, is a really contested history that deals with a lot of appropriation from Black American community. And so I was looking up archival sources like this shimmy by Gilda Gray, which is, there's no music to it, but being able to put that together with the genre of shimmy enabled me to create something that definitely was not authentic, but was interesting and intimate to the material. Okay, so what do we take away from all of this? I will wrap up. There's a lot that doing practice as research can lead us to question, and can lead us to further questions that maybe makes our research then inform our practice in a different way. And so here are some of the main questions that I'm going to continue sitting with as I continue studying this. First, I'll talk about practice as research. So how can staging a performance from archival material ask new questions of the material? Is that possible? How do we then translate what happens in a performance back into our scholarship that is based in the archive? Further study could also be done on this archive. There's a huge collection at YIVO on Azazel and Brotherson. There's an untranslated memoir from Brotherson's wife about their life, their poetry collections. There's a lot of material there that is ripe for the study. And then the last two pieces are, how do we really factor in the relational when we're looking at these already unstable and unreliable archives? How do we trace networks of people who are working together? What does that tracing do to our understanding of their work? And how do we write about the impact that their relationships had on the actual thing they made? Can we talk about art objects without talking about relationships? I think no, but we have to really put in effort to know how we talk about those relationships. And lastly, the final piece is this idea of authenticity that we come up against when we're trying to perform something. Is the Azazel Shimmy that we performed authentic? Absolutely not. It maybe has very little to do with the way that it would have been performed in Warsaw in the 1920s. Why do we have ownership over it, though, is a different and more interesting question than whether it's authentic. And I argue that perhaps a sense of intimacy and connectedness coming from that affective lens gives us a little bit more permission to play with these materials, to bring them to life, and then to put that back into truly rigorous scholarship. So thank you very much. And I'm excited to get into a discussion with everyone.